Welcome to day 3 of Family Mediation Week. Today we are talking about how mediation can help you in separation or on divorce. In this session, we are talking about children matters only, but there is a second part taking place on Friday at 1 p.m. in relation to finances. I'm Sarah Manning, partner and head of mediation at Hall Brown Family Law. I've been a lawyer for 14 years and a mediator for 13 years. I'm also a trained child inclusive mediator and I offer hybrid mediation. I sit as the chair for Family Mediation Week, which has been helping to organise the events that are taking place this week. And I also sit on the Dispute Resolution Committee for Resolution. Over to you, Laura.
Hi everyone. So my name is Laura Clapton. I'm the co-founder of Concilia Legal and Concilia Mediation in 2014. I am a family solicitor and have been since 2011, and I've been mediating since 2013. Like Sarah, I'm an accredited child inclusive and hybrid mediator, and I sit on the National Committee for Resolution. So we're going to start off by running through the objectives for this afternoon's session. So there's quite a lot to cover. We're going to be discussing what is mediation and provide you with a step-by-step process, the importance of the MIAM, what happens in the mediation, how we bring children into the mediation, and the benefits for both children and parents, whether or not mediation is appropriate where there is domestic abuse. We'll touch upon some resources that are available for families and for children themselves, look at costing options, some top tips, how to make a referral, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. But if you do have any questions, please do put them in the comments box as we go through the webinar, and I'll keep an eye on what's come through so that we can make sure that we clock those before we get to the end and turn to the Q&As. So if we start off with the definition, if you like, of family mediation. So on the Family Mediation Council website, which is the governing body for accreditors mediators, it defines family mediation as a process in which an independent, professionally trained mediator helps you work out arrangements for children and finances following separation. Mediation can also be helpful when those arrangements that have already been made need to change, particularly as children grow up. Mediators work with separating couples in ways that are flexible and tailor-made for your situation. You do not have to be in the same space as your ex. If you or the mediator decide that working with you in separate spaces is preferable. So for me, the key takeaway there is that mediation is a flexible platform and process which can be tailored to every family's unique set of circumstances. It isn't a one-size-fits-all. So before I move on to give you an overview of the process step by step, it's important to highlight the 4 core principles of mediation. The first one being that mediation is a voluntary process. So neither participant can be compelled to attend joint mediation sessions with their ex-partner. And at any point, if they do start mediation, they can choose to end that process. So the voluntary nature of it is extremely important. The second principle is that of impartiality. So the mediator is completely impartial throughout, is not there to give legal advice or to take sides. The mediator is there to facilitate those discussions between the two participants in a balanced way. Decisions are yours, which means that nothing will be decided in mediation unless it's by mutual consent, and the discussions are confidential. So no third parties can be privy to those discussions, with the exception of seeking legal advice or if both parties mutually consent to disclosing any discussions that took place during the session. So those are the core principles. Moving on to the stages, and again, I'm just going to give you a really brief overview because we're going to come on to this in more detail further on in the session. But the first one is that each party must attend an initial mediation information and assessment meeting, often referred to as the MIAM, and Sarah's going to cover what happens in a MIAM in more detail. If mediation is assessed as unsuitable, because that's part of the important part of the MIAM, if it's assessed as unsuitable, then the mediation cannot go ahead any further, and the mediator can provide a court certificate and also alternative options to you in terms of how you move forward and progress the issues. If it is assessed as suitable, then the mediator will arrange a joint session for both participants, either online or in person. And again, Sarah's going to talk in a bit more detail about what happens in the sessions. You will attend as many joint sessions as is needed and as is wanted and desired until hopefully you get to the point of reaching that resolution, at which point the mediator can then prepare a written document, sometimes known as a memorandum of understanding, which will summarise the proposals that have been reached in mediation. So that's a really swift overview of the process step by step.
Thank you, Laura. So as Laura said earlier, the first step is for both participants to attend a MIAM separately. The emphasis there on that the MIAM is separate and it's a confidential meeting, so nothing said in the MIAM will be shared with the other person, and it gives each participant the chance to speak openly with the mediator about their concerns, their perspective was what has happened so far and what has prompted the need for mediation. For me, the MIAM is the most important stage of the mediation process. It's the opportunity for the mediator to hear both sides separately, and anything that is said in the MIAM, as I said, is confidential and not shared with the other. The only time that I would breach confidentiality is if the safeguarding concerns arises, so if we believe that a child may be at risk of harm, or if you're at risk of harming yourself or others, we are under a duty to report it to the relevant agencies such as social services or the police. The MIAM allows mediators to identify any common ground and clarify the live issues. It's far more than just a procedural step before issuing court proceedings. As mediators, we are not there to decide who is telling the truth. Everyone's truth is their truth to them, and it's important that both participants feel heard and understood. And sometimes someone might say, the other person will be really charming and will get you on their sides. And I always explain that we remain completely impartial. We are not the judge and jury, and the decisions are made by them and not by the mediator. And we are there to facilitate the discussions. Mediators cannot give legal advice, but like Laura and myself, we're both lawyers. We can give legal information, but we can't give you your own specific legal advice. And it's always helpful to point that out and get your own legal advice to run alongside the process. There is a requirement to attend a MIAM before making application to court unless an exemption applies. In children matters, the main exemptions relate to domestic abuse or safeguarding concerns for the child involved. If there is safeguarding concerns are raised, the mediator will deem mediation unsuitable, as we as mediators cannot investigate this any further. It would need an assessment by a social worker or CAFCAS. CAFCAS stands for the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, and their role is to represent children's best interest in family court cases, and they have access to police record and social services. It's important to note, as Laura mentioned before, that mediation is voluntary. After the MIAM, if you've listened to the mediator, if you do not wish to continue with mediation, you don't have to at all. The MIAM is your opportunity to ask questions, understand the process, for you to make an informed decision and consider whether mediation feels the right process for you. The MIAM is also where the mediator assesses suitability for mediation. So sometimes mediation is unsuitable because neither party is willing to negotiate or compromise. So we think, well, there's no point in doing the mediation. You might as well go to court or another form of dispute resolution. At other times, concerns about domestic abuse, child safety, or power imbalances might mean that mediation will not be appropriate. As mediators, we also follow the Family Mediation Council Code of Practice, which requires MIAM to last at least 50 minutes. And in my experience, to cover everything properly, it's very difficult to do this in 50 minutes, and more often than not, mine are over an hour. We also discuss child-inclusive mediation in the MIAM, which Laura will speak about in more detail in a moment, but it's important for parents to understand that children have the right to have their voices heard about arrangements that directly affect them, and the children's needs must remain the paramount consideration. As part of the MIAM, the mediator must explain other forms of non-court dispute resolution. It's an acronym that's used more commonly now of NCDR, and not just look at mediation. So that's things like lawyer negotiations, collaborative law, arbitration, or early neutral evaluations. And I'll touch on them a bit further on in this presentation in more detail. So NCDR was introduced in April 2024 to widen the range of out-of-court options available and not just mediation. So anyone applying to court must show that they've explored some form of NCDR or that an exemption applies. And you can explore with the mediator which form would be best to assist you and your family in your situation. The MIAM is also a good time to discuss whether any additional experts may assist in reaching a resolution. It might include a child counsellor, a psychologist, an independent social worker who can be privately instructed to explore welfare concerns or identify any support or protection needed. It may be that some professionals are already involved in working with the family through school or social services, so we can discuss that in more detail. In the MIAM, I also conduct domestic abuse screening to understand the dynamics of the relationship. I ask about the reasons for separation and whether there's been any physical abuse or coercive or controlling behaviour. As domestic abuse is not only physical, it can include intimidation, invading personal space, financial control, isolation from friends and family, or even restricting everyday daily choices. And we also discuss any health concerns that may be applicable or if there's substance abuse or alcohol addiction. As a mediator, I explore how the person feels following the separation. And that's something we talk about, whether they feel able to speak openly in front of the other parent, how each person behaves when they're angry, or what emotional support they have in place. I also, as part of the MIAM, signpost people to a range of resources, such as therapists to help them alongside the process, divorce coaches, communication apps, and helpful books which can support them. It may be that the mediator feels that it'd be beneficial for both parents to also attend a parenting course and they can make recommendations. We'll also explore if you have sought legal advice or have a lawyer instructed. It's important that you do, if you do have a lawyer, that they support you through mediation, and in some cases, if needed, they can attend the sessions with you. Because, as Laura said at the beginning when going through the stages, mediation is so flexible, the MIAM is also the place to discuss how mediation could be conducted. So the traditional model is a joint session, either in person or online, and the MIAM allows us to explore what each person feels comfortable with and what is suitable. And generally, the sessions are like 1 to 2 hours long. There's an option of shuttle mediation, which may be more appropriate in some cases, where participants remain in separate rooms and the mediator moves between them, or between virtual rooms online. But the mediator needs to be transparent with each participant. This can be easy if you do not want to see the other parent or in high conflict situations. Where domestic abuse is present or in high conflict situations, the traditional model or shuttle mediation may still not be appropriate, and there's the other option of hybrid or integrated model. The main difference is the ability of the mediator to hold confidences, and the discussions generally take place in separate spaces, and the mediator is able to hold confidences between the rooms to enable confidential discussions. This can be helpful in high conflict situations, as I've said, and I'll go into more detail on that because we've got a separate slide on domestic abuse. You can also, in hybrid mediations, bring along your lawyer, which can be helpful to get on-the-spot legal advice. Both parents should be invited to a MIAM. If the other parent hasn't been invited before your MIAM takes place, this will be discussed in the session. When safe to do so, the other person should be invited to attend a MIAM, as they should be given the same opportunity to hear the same information and decide whether they want to participate in mediation. During your MIAM, the mediator will explain how and when the other person will be contacted and what happens now. Just remember, mediation is still a voluntary process, so even if they attend the other person, you can still say that you do not want to attend mediation. If you apply to court without exploring mediation, the court may pause or stay the case so that mediation or other forms of non-court dispute resolution can be tried first. Cost orders are now possible, so the court now has the power to order costs against a parent who doesn't properly explore NCDR, but this is relatively rare in children cases, but I just wanted to highlight that that can happen. As Laura mentioned in the stages, if you decide mediation is not right for you and you wish to issue court proceedings after the MIAM, we will complete a MIAM form to confirm your attendance and record the appropriate category. So there's a number of categories on the form. Either the applicant does not wish to engage in NCDR, the respondent has not responded to the mediator's invitation, both attended but one or more do not consider mediation appropriate. It could be that the mediator has deemed mediation suitable, or there's a few newer options now of where NCDR has begun but broken down or only partially resolved issues. So that would be if you've done a few sessions mediation and you've not, there's still one issue that you need a determination on or assistance from the court, then you can tick that box. Or in some cases now, the court proceedings can start and you can run mediation parallel with court proceedings. So, for example, where the court needs to look at a safeguarding concern, mediation could run alongside to discuss the interim arrangements. And maybe if there's safeguarding concerns are looked in and they say that there's there's no more concerns, it can then come back to mediation. So it's quite fluid and like flexible for each individual situation. Please note that the MIAM form lasts for 4 months from the date you attend the MIAM, and if mediation doesn't start in that period or you have not issued court proceedings, unfortunately you would have to attend a further MIAM to assess suitability with a mediator. So remember, after your MIAM, there's the 4 months that are going through there. So I'll just move on. So what happens in mediation? So at the start of the mediation, the mediator explains the process and sets respectful guidelines, and you will have been sent an agreement to mediate to sign by the mediator before the meeting, setting out clearly everyone's agreement to how the session will take place, which you both sign, and the mediator does. It's important to listen when the other person is speaking. You will always get your turn to respond. And I know this can be challenging, especially when you hear something you disagree with. But part of mediation is ensuring that both of you feel heard and understood. I ask in my mediations that people be respectful and civil to one another at all times. The mediation is confidential, as we've said a few times, and the mediator will remind you that the session is not recorded and that neither participant can record the session. You must join from a confidential space where no one else can overhear or interrupt the messages. And after this, the meeting, after the session, the mediator will often prepare notes after the session to set out what's been said, but it's not a transcript of what's happened in the mediation. It's just to help assist in between the sessions. So all discussions in mediation take place on a without prejudice basis, and this is something that's covered in detail in the agreement to mediate. This means that mediation is a safe space to explore ideas, options, and possible compromises without worrying that anything you say will be used against you later. So the without prejudice allows you to make suggestions or explore possible solutions freely. If mediation does not lead to an agreement, those suggestions cannot be shown to the court or used as evidence unless both participants agree. And mediators, it's important to note, cannot be called as witnesses. So this just encourages open and honest discussions, and it allows you to say things like, I might be willing to try X, but I'm not committing to it, and seeing and testing the water and seeing what they think to them proposals. This protections help keeps the process constructive and future focused, and it allows the mediator to stay in control of the conversations. I always say my role, if someone asks me what my role is in the mediation, I always say it's a bit like a referee, keeping everything on track, ensuring fairness, and helping both of you focus on finding solutions. The mediator remains in control, and they can stop the process at any time. So if things do get a little bit heated or people aren't being respectful, as a mediator, I would just end the mediation and be really firm that that's what's happening. Also, mediation is so voluntary for you. So if you're online mediation, you can leave at any time. And I always say you've got the support of the little red button on the right-hand side on your Zoom call that you can end if things are getting a bit too much. I think online mediation is really helpful if you feel a bit uneasy about seeing your ex-partner, as the sessions can take place in the comfort of your own home. I also discuss in the mediations about setting breaks if that's needed, if someone needs that. And I always set out what people can do if they want a break to ensure everyone feels comfortable with the process. So there's always breakout rooms you can set up on Zoom. And sometimes just having a 5-minute break, having a cup of tea can really help. During the mediation, each person shares their perspective without interruptions. The mediator helps identify the issues that need to be discussed. I always agree an agenda at the beginning to manage expectations and focus the sessions, because before you know it, an hour's gone by and you've stuck on one point, so it's good to have some focus. Mediation sessions, as I said, last an hour to 2 hours, and they can be really emotionally draining. You'll explore practical solutions together, share ideas, and the mediator might suggest some ideas that they've got from working with other separated families that you might not have considered. And the aim is to work towards a fair, voluntary agreement, and often in the form of a parenting plan in children cases. There are free templates that you can have a look at for parenting plans. Kafka's designated website has a parenting plan that you can have a look at. Some plans are very detailed, including routines such as religion, schooling, bedtime, screen times. Others mainly focus on the time that the children spend with each parent. They're all always tailored to the needs of the individual family, and no two mediations are the same, and everybody's values are completely different as well. So it's important, it goes back to the MIAM, to get to know the family and what works for them. If an agreement is reached, it's usually recorded a memorandum of understanding or a parenting plan, as I said. But important to note that in mediation, that the if you do reach an agreement, it's all under the without prejudice, which I talked about a moment ago. But the court operate a no order principle, meaning that the court will not make an order if parents are able to agree arrangements themselves, and they encourage parents to resolve matters without judicial intervention where possible. If you want any agreement to be legally binding after the mediation session, the mediator can provide legal information on how to do this, or you can seek your own independent legal advice. Many people ask me how many sessions they'll need, and I always smile and say, well, how long's a piece of string? There isn't really a set number because no two families are the same, and it depends entirely on the issues you want to work through, how quickly those issues can be resolved, and how able parents are to reach agreements together. It's important to remember that the mediator doesn't make decisions for you or give you the legal advice. Mediation is your space as parents to make the choice that feels right for your children and your situation. Some families I work with come back once a year to plan the calendar together for the year ahead, while others come for just one session and we can sort out a small issue that's niggling. Sometimes families need several sessions, especially when the discussions are more complex or when change needs to happen gradually. It's such a flexible process. It's responsive and tailored to the needs of your individual family rather than just forcing you into a fixed process or timetable, which might be the case with court. Thank you. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Sarah. So the next part of the presentation is going to be focused specifically on involving children in mediation, known as child inclusive mediation. And Sarah touched upon that when she was covering what happens in that initial MIAM appointment. So the mediator, as Sarah said, will discuss initially with each individual the process of child inclusive mediation and how it might benefit them and their children. So again, just looking at the Family Mediation Council website and how they describe child inclusive mediation. So child inclusive mediation provides an opportunity for children and young people to have their voices heard directly during the process of mediation to help them feel respected and listened to, and at their request to assist parents or carers to receive, understand and take account of the children's messages regarding decisions and arrangements for the child to be made by the parents. So that's just an overview of child inclusive mediation. We haven't got time in this webinar to go through a step-by-step process, but just to give you a bit of an overview, if child inclusive mediation is going to take place, there would ordinarily be a planning meeting between the parents and the mediator, so they can plan for that meeting, and the mediator can find out more about the child or children concerned and what each parent is hoping to achieve out of the process. Then there will be a meeting with the child or children, and then there will be a separate feedback session with the parents. So that's kind of a standard process of meeting with the parents, meeting with the child, another meeting with the parents, just to give you an overview. But ultimately, how and why does that happen? So children will only be seen by a mediator if both parents want that to happen. So that's why it's really important to have that planning meeting so both parents can make an informed decision as to whether or not they feel it would be beneficial for their child to have the opportunity to speak to the mediator within the mediation process. The next point, which is really important, is that it's also the child's decision as to whether or not to meet with the mediator. So it is absolutely a voluntary process for the child as much as it is for the parents. So it is an invitation for the child to meet with the mediator. It's not a formal request. Okay, so it's really important that a child wants to have a voice, wants to be listened to, wants to have that opportunity to speak to the mediator. So consent, as I say, important for everybody involved. So if a meeting is going to take place in the way I described before, so the mediator will meet the child in an informal, friendly environment, and that sometimes can be the mediator's place of work, or it could possibly be at the school or some other neutral environment. But within that meeting, the discussions that are had between the child and the mediator are confidential. And so it's really important, and I always explain that to the parents and to the child, that it is a safe space for the child to share their thoughts and feelings and ideas without worrying about everything being necessarily fed back to their parents or to any third party for that matter. And so it's really important, as I say, you create that safe space to allow the child to open up. And the only exception to a mediator breaching a child's confidentiality is if there were safety concerns. So I will explain that to parents as well. You know, if I feel that a child's at risk of harm, that's when I've got a duty to breach that confidentiality. You know, if ultimately a child tells me that on Saturday, dad or mum drags him or her along to football matches and they don't really like it, but you know, so what? It's just one of those things, you know, but don't tell them that I don't really like football. You know, that kind of thing. It's, you know, ultimately it's a safe space for the child to be able to share whatever they feel is on their mind and important to them. And then between the child and the mediator, jointly will decide on what information the child wants to feed back to the parents and how the child wants the mediator to feed back. So it's the child's decision on what gets fed back, and it's really important that the mediator is really clear on how the child would like that to be fed back to the parents. I remember when I started out as a child inclusive mediator, it was explained to me that if the child wants to be there when you feed back to the parents, they can be. And in my experience of doing child inclusive mediation for quite a few years now, I've never had a child say they want to be there. So what is more common is that you will agree on what that feedback is with the child, and then you will have a separate meeting without the child there to feed back to the parents. And me personally, I want that meeting to be booked in at the same time that I'm booking in the meeting with the child, and to take place within 2 days following the meeting with the child, because I just think it's really important for the child concerned that they know when it's happening and they know it's going to happen, you know, fairly quickly. They're not going to be waiting a long time for that feedback to be given. And it's about reassuring the child and also having really clear ground rules with the parents that the child's not going to then be interrogated, or they're not going to be asked questions around, you know, why they said certain things to the mediator. So again, all that kind of happens in the planning meeting when you discuss with the parents, you know, what is expected of them, as well as what they can expect from you as the mediator. It's really important to note that the feedback is given to the parents verbally, so there's no written documentation that is produced. And it is a question that I do get asked quite a lot, not just from participants, but sometimes from solicitors that might not be familiar with the process. So there is absolutely no written documentation, no written report around what the child has said to the mediator. It's all given to the parents verbally. And again, it is, for me, it just emphasises the spirit of that this is confidential, safe space, not to be used in any other form other than because the child wants a voice and wants to be listened to and wants the parents to hear what they've got to say. And then secondary, that also might provide the parents with some insight, which will help them make decisions. So no written documentation is produced. And then finally, just to note that not all mediators can speak to children as part of the mediation process, and they need to be specifically trained in child inclusive mediation. If you've already started mediation with a mediator that isn't trained, then that's not an issue, because what that mediator can do is bring in and sort of parachute in a child inclusive mediator to do the discrete piece of work with the child and do that feedback, and then you can carry on mediating as parents with the mediator that you started the process with. So what are the benefits? And I've said benefits of child inclusive mediation, but some of these benefits are applicable to any form of mediation discussing children. So, you know, mediation just generally is a process, how it benefits parents. So seeing the situation through the eyes of the child. So through giving the child a voice, whether that is through speaking with the mediator, or perhaps the child has already spoken to another professional and information has been fed back to the parents in relation to that particular encounter, or just through ultimately the parents within the mediation session discussing things from ultimately the child's wants and needs rather than their own, you know, really putting the child at the centre of those discussions. So mediation is a great way to do that and ensure that, as I say, the discussions are child-centred and through the eyes of the child. Mediation helps parents reach joint decisions and good decisions. Again, it's about making informed decisions as parents, having listen to each other's perspective and each other's views, and trying to understand those perspectives and views with the help of the mediator. But in addition to that, having a really clear understanding of the child's perspective in order to make those really good and long-lasting decisions. Mediation helps parents put arrangements in place without delay. So, being able to book in sessions fairly quickly, depending on everybody's availability, unlike a court process where you can be waiting months for even a first hearing. It encourages parents to not allow the conflicts between them to affect their arrangement. So again, going back to that whole, in mediation, the mediator will be really focused on making sure that the discussions are child-centred. And so moving away from the conflict and moving and focusing on actually what does the child need from each parent, and how can we meet those needs, and how can we ensure that any conflict between us does not impact on what is best for that child. Child inclusive, also focusing on the child acts as a reminder to the parents that the children love them both. And I think that's a really nice message in mediation. Ultimately, in the majority of cases, you are working with two parents, and you are the two most important people in your child's life. And just having that, ultimately mediation, it's having and remembering that the common goal is for a child to feel loved and feel secure and feel safe, and that is working towards that common goal as to how to do that together as parents. Specifically, child inclusive mediation. Again, this is a little bit repetitive, but it allows parents to make informed decisions based on the child's perspective. So rather than making assumptions, and it's really funny because sometimes, I'll speak to parents and they both think they actually do have a really good understanding of the child's views, and they're not and actually they agree on what they think the child's views might be. But actually sometimes they can be quite shocked and amazed at actually what a child is really thinking and feeling about a situation that perhaps they didn't think was an issue, and then they need to reconsider whether or not that particular arrangement is working for that child. And also the child can bring in things that aren't directly relevant to what the parents are trying to resolve. And sometimes that can be really helpful. Sometimes it's something that's beyond the parents' control. And I had a situation where I had two children come to see to me, a brother and a sister, and they really wanted to no longer have to share a bedroom. And that was really important to them, and they wanted their own bedroom. And that was something that, ultimately wasn't something that the parents could resolve in mediation. But as I say, it's allowing the child to say anything that they want to say to you without you having a really strict agenda on what is covered. So as I say, child inclusive mediation gives parents information which they were not able to obtain directly from the child. And as I said, that is only one option, and there are other ways in which that voice can be heard. And Sarah touched upon that before, that will be discussed in the MIAM, and also when looking at working with other professionals such as private independent social workers or therapists. Mediation is primarily used to talk about arrangements, but also to improve communication between parents. And as mediators, we can give you ideas and suggestions for what other families have done that might help with communication and communication aids such as parenting apps. And ultimately, by involving the child in the decision making, it can then improve future decision making as well. And it's all about building foundations. So it can have a real long-lasting beneficial impact. So what are the benefits of mediation for children specifically? As I've said before, really important that they feel listened to. It's one of the biggest criticisms from research that's been done over the years about how children feel their parents handled their separation. One of the biggest criticisms from children is, and this covers the first two points, is not feeling that they were listened to and not being kept informed. So, that this is something that can be tackled really well in mediation. As I've said before, from a child's perspective, it's really important that they don't have to necessarily communicate their feelings to their parents directly. And that's not to say that they've not got a great relationship with both parents, but children are really loyal. They don't want to upset us. They don't want to have to feel like they are taking sides, and mediation isn't about them taking sides. It's just about them feeling they can speak freely about how they're feeling with somebody who's not mum, not dad. So that's really important. And as I said, they're not being asked to make decisions. It's without pressure. It's their forum, their space, and that's it. Sometimes children need their own arena to be able to have a voice. It's friendly, it's informal. As I said, neither parent is present. So again, it's meeting somebody who is detached from that situation in a very neutral setting. I've seen children individually, but also together with siblings, and that's something that we discuss in the planning meeting with the parents to see what they think might be most appropriate. It can work really well with siblings, particularly if you've got a younger sibling who is, from my experience, under the age of 10, wants to be involved. Parents want that child to be involved, but needs a bit of support from older sibling. Mediation massively demonstrates to a child that parents are working together, which inevitably will make a child feel more secure and more confident in any arrangements that are made, because it's done by their parents working together and finding a mutual way forward. Children being treated as individuals, it's really empowering for them. It can give them reassurance, can really have a positive impact on their mental well-being, reducing anxiety. And ultimately, there might be things that they're keeping close to their chest that ultimately they can unburden through this process.
Thank you, Laura. And so I'm just going to touch upon, can you use mediation if a victim of domestic abuse? And I've touched upon this in the MIAM about how we look into that. It's really hard to do this on one slide, and I understand it, you could probably do a whole hour webinar on this with domestic abuse. But people often ask whether mediation can still be used. And the most important thing to say is your safety is always the main priority. If I identify during the MIAM that domestic abuse has taken place or is taking place, the mediator should always signpost you to a domestic abuse support agency. They offer the specialist advice, emotional support, and help with safety planning, and they will carry out their own assessments and guide you on the best next steps. When mediation is suitable, the type we use is called hybrid or integrated mediation. It's sort of the go-to model when there is domestic abuse present. With the hybrid mediation, it works differently with the traditional model, which the conversations take place in separate spaces or separate online, and you each speak to the mediator privately with the ability to hold confidence, which I mentioned earlier. The domestic abuse screening as well, just to point out, it's a continuous thing. It doesn't just happen in the MIAM. You're always checking in at the beginning of each MIAM and continually checking. I do that in normal mediations, the traditional mediation, should I say, when two parties still live in the same house together. So I always check in and make sure if anything's happened at the beginning of joint session since the last meeting. If the session takes place in separate spaces, there's a less pressure and less manipulation. All communication goes through the mediator. It helps reduce coercive or controlling behaviour, gaslighting, or last-minute changes in position, and the mediator stays fully in control of the process. I'm sure both Laura and I have had many mediations where one party's tried to control the process, and we've had to be quite firm and say, it's our process. You can have immediate legal advice with the hybrid integrated mediation. A lawyer present can be with you throughout the session. They can give you advice straight away, and their guidance cannot be undermined when the mediator is there and there to manage the process. You can also have specialist support. You can have an IDVA, an independent domestic violence advisor, or an ISVA, independent sexual violence advisor, or possibly a divorce coach for emotional support in the session. You do not have to see or hear the other person when you're doing it online, and separate rooms, especially online, gives you the time to think, breathe, and process decisions without pressure. And I feel avoiding the trauma and cost of going to court, even with screens and protections, court can be overwhelming and triggering. Mediation avoids the stress of being in the same building and hearing the other person's voice in the courtroom settings, stops all the, barristers cross-examine you and things like that. So it is just another option. And I'm not saying that it works for all domestic situations, but it's another one to explore. And it helps rebuild your confidence and sense of choice because you are not face to face. It's easier to make them decisions without fear or emotional triggers. And this can help you feel more in control of the process because you've known each other, usually in these situations, for a very long time. You know what triggers the other person. So doing it on separate spaces can really help that. And the other person is held accountable. So if they have a lawyer with them, their behaviour is monitored and they are more likely to remain appropriate and respectful when they've got a mediator there and the solicitor sat next to them. So I would really consider that. And like I say, sorry, I've just gone through that in a really short space, but just a few of the key points there. So, what happens if you reach an impasse at mediation? So, mediation doesn't fix everything, and it's important for families to know that reaching an impasse is completely normal. Sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, parents simply can't reach an agreement. And remember, in mediation, you as parents make the decisions, it's not the mediator. And when you can't agree, it can be tempted to jump straight into court proceedings. But court can become very positional, stressful, and expensive. So it's helpful to know that there are several other options you can explore first. So, one approach is to bring the voice of the child where Laura's spoken to about, and hearing directly from the child can unlock a situation, help parents see things from a new perspective. If this doesn't move things forwards or not appropriate, you might consider involving an independent social worker who's experienced, highly trained professional who works outside the local authority and can meet with the whole family. They can offer specialist assessments, an impartial view, and suggest rooted in extensive safeguarding and family work experience. For some families, having an independent expert shine a light on what is happening can really break the deadlock and guide them back towards agreement. Another option is early neutral evaluation. This is often introduced when it becomes clear that mediation alone is not enough. It's sometimes referred to as E&E. It gives you something the mediation can't, an informed expert view on what a court would likely decide if the case went before a judge. A neutral evaluator is usually a senior family lawyer or a retired judge, barrister, and reviews the key points of the dispute and gives a clear, impartial opinion. It doesn't replace mediation, and the evaluator doesn't make the decisions for you. Instead, it gives you both a reality check from someone who knows how the court approach similar cases. So you'll both be able to do a short summary of your positions, and then it's not binding, but it's often highly persuasive. And once parents hear a calm, neutral assessment of how a court might approach their case, the fog often lifts and people become more open to compromise, be realistic, and more able to return to mediation with a fresh mindset. Some families also benefit from the collaborative process, which is face-to-face negotiation model, and each parent has their own collaborative trained lawyer, and everyone signs a no-court agreement. All the discussions happen in a four-way meeting around the table with a shared goal of reaching a durable, respectful agreement for your child. And if it all still doesn't get you over the line, you may also choose arbitration. Arbitration is essentially appointing your own private judge, someone you both agree on, who listens to the issues and makes a binding decision. It can be used for most private law children matters, such as arrangements for the time each parent spends with a child, holidays, schooling, relocation, and it's flexible and private and often much quicker than going through the overburdened court system. Parents can choose the arbitrator, the style of the hearing, whether to meet in person, online, or even paper alone. And once the arbitrator makes a decision, it's called a determination, and that settles the matter, and it can be converted into a court order if needed. If parents decide to explore arbitration or early neutral evaluation, the mediator can support with preparing the neutral papers or completing the ARB1 form and liaising with the lawyers to make the process as smoothly and timely and cost-effective as possible. Thank you.
Oh, Sarah, sorry, could you just go back a slide?
Sorry, I went a bit too quick.
No, that's fine. I'm not going to go over here. We just highlighted some resources that are available for families and for children. Just conscious of time, but the webinar is being recorded, so you can go back and have a look at these slides. But there's just a mixture on there of guides that I found in my experience are really beneficial for parents, but also some online information for children themselves as well, particularly teenagers and young adults. So yeah, just a few examples there, but there are ample more out there, and we've just highlighted a few. So yeah, I'll just move on to the next slide.
Helen from Family Mediation Council will be sharing them on our social media, some of the resources as well that are shared, so keep an eye out from them.
Wow. And then just in terms of how much does mediation cost, and I'm going to tie this into a question that we've had as well around the government voucher scheme. So the government voucher scheme is still in place, it is still running, and the idea behind it is that there is up to £500 available per family to contribute towards mediation fees. Now, the contribution is non-means tested, so all families are eligible for it. It's not based on income and capital thresholds, and it has whatever mediation service you go through, they have to have signed up to the voucher scheme, because it's the mediation service, not you yourself, that will claim that voucher. And so what I do, for example, is when I'm sending out an invoice for a mediation session, is that we'll deduct the monies from the voucher scheme off our charges. So it's ultimately all we need you to do is consent to that and to us applying the voucher scheme. Just important to note, because it's often a question around, can you use the voucher scheme towards the MyAM? You can't do that. It has to be towards substantive mediation, so joint mediation sessions. And I've got a question specifically around the voucher scheme, where you're dealing with older children and perhaps they don't want to attend mediation. So ultimately, the voucher can be used towards the parents' mediation. So it doesn't have to be a child-inclusive mediation. You don't have to. The child doesn't have to agree to attend mediation for you to be able to apply the voucher scheme. The mediation just has to deal with issues concerning children. So hopefully that answers that question. The other way of funding mediation is through legal aid. So legal aid is available for those that qualify on a means tested basis, on an income and capital assessment. And so you would need to reach out to mediation services that offer legal aid, because not all do. And that information can be found on the Family Mediation Council website, and we'll show you what that looks like towards the end of the session. Some legal aid is still available, but as I say, that would need to be assessed by the mediation service. And then finally, as you would expect, you can pay on a privately paying basis, and there's no one size fits all in terms of what those charges look like. And so that's something to discuss with the individual mediation service that you contact. And so before we move on finally to how to make a referral, Sarah and I thought we'd just share a few of our top tips for how you can have a positive mediation experience. So first one is to stay calm and keep an open mind. Easier said than done, but ultimately, what I would say is, yes, you will go into the mediation with your own idea for what you want to achieve, what your objectives are, but yet just keep an open mind. And so when I say that, I think the most important there is just listening, listen and trying to understand why the other person's perspective on the situation might not mirror yours. And as Sarah said before, it's not about finding the truth or trying to work out whose narrative is right. Is right. You will have your own thoughts and feelings, and so it isn't about trying to find the what's right, but more about trying to find a level of understanding that will help you move forward. Think about what matters most to you. So as Sarah said before, the sessions are normally 1 to 2 hours. And you can go into it so much that you want to discuss and explore, but try and prioritize, try and think about what is the most important and what's the best use of that time. And the mediator will, be there to try and keep you on track, but having that in your own mind as well. You've got limited time, make it count. Getting advice early. As Sarah says, the mind's really important. Getting legal advice is important. And I always say to clients, legal or mediation, doing that early at the start, it's the way that you start this journey can really dictate how it progresses. And so getting off on a good start, being able to be informed about what your options are is really important. Consider a team approach. So as I say, I've already said about mediation and legal team, but also thinking about other support, maybe emotional support, therapy, maybe thinking about a possible divorce coach, and also thinking about your own support network and who are going to be the good people to have around as you go through this journey. And then finally, from me, aim for progress, not perfection. So sometimes I'll talk about a scale and, thinking about, right, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you now in terms of your parenting relationship? What would need to happen just to move up the scale by 1? What would that look like? What would by 2, by 3? But it's about progress and not trying to get to 10 out of 10. But, finding something that you both can work with moving forward.
Thank you, Laura. So another one is choose words carefully. Language matters. So when think about how you want to approach something in mediation, think how the other person is going to approach it. Nobody likes to be blamed for something, and pull it back, and just think about how the way and the language used does affect the communication and the hostility. In mediation, we try and sort of take the heat out of it. Look for solutions that work for both sides. Many people just fixate on what's in their best interest or the other and try think of it from the other person's perspective as well. That helps to reach a compromise. Weigh up the costs and the benefits. Consider the mounting legal costs. Have a look at what it'd cost you. Ask your solicitor if you were to go to court with this or other options of how much it would cost, and weigh up that with the costs and the benefits. It's really important to understand your best and worst case scenario. So a good way your solicitor can help you alongside mediation is find out what your best day in court and your worst day in court would be, and ensure that you know what arguments that you might win on, ones that you won't, or issues, and just be a bit more aware of your legal standing. It goes back to what Laura said earlier, get advice early. And remember that mediation is not instead of legal advice. We can't give you your own specific advice. It's just legal information. So getting everything together will help you get the best out of the mediation time, because it does go very quickly. And also remember, justice and fairness are in the eyes of the beholder. I always say, for me to feel like I've done my job properly at the end of a mediation is that both of you will come out with an outcome that you can reasonably live with. We're not there to say winner or loser, or anything like that, like it does happen in court. So just think of that in terms, and sometimes you might win on one point, might lose on another point, and it's about that, for mediation to work, there's got to be some compromise and agreement moving forward. So we'll just go on to the last slide about how to make a mediation referral. You can search on the Family Mediation Council website and pop in your postcode, and it'll bring up your local mediators. Most mediators now offer online mediation, so distance isn't always important. You can choose someone who feels like the right fit for you, even if they're not nearby. But you just have to do it online. It's really important to find a mediator who offers the service you need. For example, if you think that you might need child inclusive mediation, or you might want your lawyer to come be part of the process, make sure you research the mediator beforehand that they can offer that service. Look at their websites, look at the profiles, and make sure you're comfortable with their approach and experience, and that covers as well with like domestic abuse. So I've just put a thank you up there. I'm just going to stop sharing the slides, and then we can go to answering any of the questions.
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes left, and we've had a few questions that have come through. So thank you. And if anybody has got a question, please do put it in there now, and we'll see whether we can get to it. So the first question on there is, what minimum age would a child be involved in? And I'm assuming there in terms of specifically being spoken to by the mediator by way of child inclusive mediation. So the guidelines are that children aged 10 and above should have the opportunity to be heard within the mediation process and to have that voice. But it's not a hard and fast rule. So the youngest child I've seen had just turned 9. But I do know mediators that have seen younger children. And as I said before, particularly where there's siblings, so that can often lead to younger children being seen, but with an older sibling. But what's really crucial here is about the planning meeting with the parents. So that's why that meeting is so important, to find out about the child, because you need to ensure that they've got the level of understanding and maturity that would be an appropriate environment for them to be in, and that both parents feel that would be appropriate, and also how the mediator might need to adjust. And that can include what's in the room, to ensure that a child feels comfortable, and you'll put different things in the room depending on the age of the child. And it might be that actually you explore their feelings through drawings and more visual aids. So it's not a hard and fast rule. Guidelines generally 10 and above, but younger children have been seen by mediators.
Yeah, just to echo what you said, Laura, as well, is the maturity of the child. Is it the, there's different maturity levels. Some 9-year-old, 8-year-old might be really mature, some quite immature. So you've got to take that. And especially if there's special educational needs and things like that, even if a child's 10, that might still not be appropriate. So, it's all talking about that. So I think we've got another question about what about gambling harm? Is this still considered domestic abuse as it's not physical but more emotional and financially? Is it still suitable? I think gambling harm would come into when I do my safeguarding checks when you talk about drug substance, alcohol and gambling. It is still a factor that's taken into account and that could be seen as financial abuse. And obviously it's an addiction. So that definitely would be something that we would take into account of assessing the suitability of mediation. Do you agree, Laura?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the key really is about, so what we're looking for as mediators is to make sure that both parties are able to freely participate in mediation. And so it's about how that individual feels that behaviour and that experience has been could have an impact on them and how it might have an impact on them in the mediation. And therefore, can we put safeguarding measures in place that will make that person feel not just physically but also emotionally safe? So yeah, no, I agree absolutely, and we would cover that in the MIAM in order to work out whether mediation was still suitable, and if so, in how would that take place in the safest possible way.
Yeah. We've had another one in that you might be able to answer, Laura. At a time when children may have lost trust in their parents, is there a counter argument to say that child inclusive mediation further destroys trust as the child's voice is kept confidential with the mediator and from the parents?
I think that, I mean, one thing, so as a mediator, our main mantra is do no harm. Ultimately, we're there because we want to help and we want to make things better for children and families. So I know I keep going back to the planning meeting, but that's where it is really important to consider what the benefit is and whether or not there is any risk of harm to a child. I mean, ultimately, I don't think the confidential nature of it is counterproductive, because it's the same as therapy. If a child went and had therapy, that's a confidential space for them as well. But it is important from my perspective as a mediator. It's not that parents have to follow their child's wishes and feelings to the letter, because sometimes it just might not be appropriate or just not workable to do what the child wants. But it's about them being open to listen to that and to say, ultimately, that is going to impact, we are going to take that into account, it's going to impact our decision moving forward. And so to know that it's not just going to be dismissed, because actually that could do more harm than good. If actually a parent's saying, well, whatever the child says, I actually don't think that that's what they really think and feel. And that potentially could then be counterproductive and could do more harm if a child then feels, well, I've been given this space to speak, but actually, I've not been properly listened to.
We've just got another few questions if we can just fire through them in the next couple of minutes. So I can answer this one. Domestic abuse found in MIAMS and discharged with an FM1 claimed by one parent can be compounded by the other parent's solicitor who has defence, files a C1A and a C100, but yet the abuse not raised by them in the MIAMS. What's the advice? You'd never know if they did raise abuse in the MIAM because the MIAMs are confidential. So I would certainly have not disclosed that. Even if I'd have said mediation's not suitable, I wouldn't have disclosed to either party or parent of the reasons for that. Would just tick a box. So again, everything in mediation is confidential in the MIAM, so you wouldn't ever stop someone bringing something up further. And as I said at the beginning, you couldn't be a witness in court about anything that's happened, and the mediator would have to respect the confidential nature of the MIAMs, which can be frustrating. Sometimes both one party really wants to do mediation, I've done the other MIAM. I just go back to them and say, sorry, mediation's not progressing, and they've paid money for the MIAM and they're saying why, and I can't give the reasons, and it's always a really frustrating part of the mediation, but unfortunately we can't breach the confidentiality. Another question is made. Sorry,
I was just saying we're at 2 o'clock now. I think we've probably got time for one more really quickly.
Yeah. Is maintenance something a mediator can discuss?
Yeah, so absolutely. So obviously today we've been specifically talking about mediation in relation to children, and this question might be regarding child maintenance, but what we're talking about is the arrangements for children. What we will be covering on Friday, between 1 and 2, is a similar session about the family mediation process, but geared more towards finances. And so that may and that will encompass mediation amongst other mediation maintenance amongst other things. So yes, it can be discussed in mediation, and if you want more information about financial mediations, then you can tune in on Friday, or you can watch it after it's been recorded.
Yeah, and just quickly the last one about do you have to attempt mediation before a private steps order? No, there's when you do the application for a private steps order with a court, there's certain exemptions. So if a child's at risk or there's domestic abuse, there's a list on there of things to do for the exemption. So you wouldn't have to do the MIAM if you covered one of the exemptions. Sometimes it's hard because you need evidence, so you would have to come to a MIAM before, but you'd have to take legal advice on that because it's each individual situation. Thank you for all the questions. There was really good questions for us to finish off there. If you haven't seen any of the other webinars, we've got a whole range of them taking place this week, and you can look at the timetable, and the recordings will be on there on the Family Mediation Council website. All right, thank you.
Thank you.